So we are in week 2. We're going to talk about principle 2, which is engagement. So that's practice number 2. But today I thought we'd start with a very practical, literal interpretation of what it means to be engaged with a little bit of congregation participation. So we are going to spend a couple minutes with my guilty pleasure game show, Love Island. No, I'm just kidding. Wouldn't that be terrible? My wife just found out. She's like, I didn't know he watched that show. Honey, I don't. I don't even know what that is. It's actually Family Feud. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you a category, and I just want you to shout out what you believe the answers would be, and then I'm going to reveal them all at the same time. So we're not going to go too long. But we asked the internet, the biggest social media influencers in the U.S. Shout out some answers. Mr. Beast. Okay, you guys have to participate. All right, survey says Mr. Beast and a bunch of people I don't actually know. All right, second question. We asked the internets, who are the wealthiest Americans? Elon Musk. Survey says Elon Musk, Larry Ellison, Mark Zuckerberg, and Jeff Bezos. All right, we asked the internets this question. What is the best binge shows of 2025? I hope Love Island's not up there. This is going to be really weird. Survey says Last of Us Season 2, Squid Game Season 2, Adolescence in Paradise. And the final one, we asked the internets, what are the Amazon must-haves for 2025? Survey says, all right, someone just very nervously pushed their Stanley under their seat so no one knows that they own one. All right, so what are we talking about? Why do we care about this? As Americans, we are literally obsessed with things like this. We're obsessed with our social media platforms and our influence. We're obsessed with cash or wealth. We're obsessed with the algorithms that feed us content that we become obsessed with. And then we're obsessed with things or the marketers that send us stuff. And that got me thinking, why are we obsessed with these things? And I think in part it's because at some point we incorrectly associated being part of the in crowd with belonging. And so we're so afraid of missing out on what everybody else is doing that we're spending more and more time focused on these areas. Which got me thinking again, because I'm a big thinker when I'm not watching Love Island. What's that doing to us? And so I got a chart for that because I'm also a nerd. So here's my chart. And I have to say this since this will be on the internet. I made this chart, but it is factually, directionally accurate. So if you look here, everything is up and to the right except for one line. And the most shocking one is the yellow line. And that yellow line is the growth of the storage space industry. We are so good at buying things that we have to build bigger barns to put, oh my gosh, that was warned about in the Bible. Don't build bigger barns. And here's the problem. There's one that's going down, happiness. So even though we're doing an exceptionally good job at all the things we're obsessed with, it's not making us any happier. And yes, I know happiness isn't the point, but just for intents and purposes, for the analogy, we're going to use the word happiness. So that's why I think it's really important that we label these things for what they actually are. They are scams. So if you think about it, social media, cash, algorithms. There's a beautiful slide. Thank you. Josh made me put this one in here. Social media, cash, algorithms, marketing. Those are all just scams. And the Bible promised us that these scams would come when they talked about how Satan comes to lie and kill and steal and destroy. He's not going to do that in ways that we'd be disinterested in because then no one would fall for it. He's going to use things that seem very reasonable to draw us in so that we get distracted from the more important thing, which I guess it's fair to then quote you too and say we still haven't found what we're looking for. Here's the reality. No one in this room is going to be as rich as Musk, as influential as Mr. Beast. Personally, I don't enjoy that much TV, so I'm not worried about binge watching. And I don't own a lot of stuff. I don't buy a lot of stuff. I should say I own a lot of stuff. I don't buy a lot of stuff. But when I do, I go to Goodwill, because those of you who have the buying problem, you give some really good stuff away. And I appreciate you. So thank you. Because here's the reality. Chasing after more, being part of the in crowd, isn't actually helping us achieve engagement in the way that we thought. Which is why I started asking a different question. Who are the happiest people I know? Sit in that for a minute. And then I want to challenge you. It's not the same person whose life you're obsessed with because you see their hashtag best day ever, or their big car, or their new house. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about who are the people in your life that sit with you. They make you laugh. They bring joy. When you're in trouble or you need help, they show up. That's the people I'm talking about. And since I like the game show Family Feud, I thought that I would put up a list of John's happiest people, and I'll reveal it to all of you. Right now, some of you are very nervous because you've noticed there's 4 names, and I come from a family of 7, and other people are here. So you're like, oh my gosh, he's about to tell us who he actually likes. No, that would be terrible. I'm not going to do that. But I did consider the question, and what I came up with is that these people, there is something different about them. But there's a great news to that, and that's the things that are different about them are completely obtainable by everyone in this room. And the better news is that if you're a Christian, Jesus modeled the different way. So we literally have the example of what it looks like to live a life where we stop chasing the scams and start living truly engaged, happy, healthy lives. And so that's what we're going to do today. Today, I am going to use a style of preaching called expository, which means I'm going to take a section of the Bible. We're going to go line by line. Good news is you'll know exactly where we're at in the agenda. Bad news, you'll know exactly where we're at in the agenda. So we're going to start with Luke chapter 8. We're going to start in verse 40. We're going to go through verse 49. And this is what Luke 8:40 says. Now when Jesus returned, a crowd welcomed him, for they were all expecting him. So here's what we know. Jesus was coming across the Sea of Galilee to the Jewish side. So he'd been on the Gentile side, which means he'd been on the side where people he was a stranger. And he performed a miracle where he cast out a bunch of demons from one person. They went into pigs. The pigs went off the side of a cliff. And it turns out the Gentiles weren't too happy with what had happened. So they asked him to leave. So he left, got on a boat, came back to the Jewish side. So now he was essentially his homecoming. I have come home. And so there was a crowd of people. Here's what I want the point to get across. We just talked about being part of the in crowd's not the point. Jesus was really good at drawing crowds, but Jesus never made drawing the crowd the point. And there's a huge difference between people. We know people who do things just to get attention, and we know people who do things that make you pay attention. And that's who we want to become as Christians, the kind of people who are doing things that others are like, I want to be around that. I want to engage with those people. So, next verse, we see that there's a man named Jairus. He's a synagogue leader who came and fell at the feet of Jesus, pleading with him to come to his house. So Jairus, what we learn is he's a religious leader. And that means, for the purpose of our analogy, he would have been that time's big scammer, right? He would have had a huge social presence. He would have had access to cash and wealth. He would have had all the things that everybody wanted, right? Nice clothes. He would have had tons of influence. But yet it wasn't enough. which is why he had to come and find Jesus when he returned. And why was he seeking out Jesus? We see that in verse 42. Because his daughter, a girl of about 12, was dying. As Jesus was on his way, the crowds almost crushed him. So Jairus, who has access to anyone and anything, when he was in his greatest time of need, came to Jesus. He couldn't do it for himself. He needed something or someone better, and he came to Jesus. And Jesus totally said, yep, I will come help you. We see that because it says on his way. But we also learn about the crowds, right? The crowd was a crushing size. So for me, I started thinking, I'm like, what's a crushing crowd? And I thought to the old Black Friday when they had the $5 70,000-inch TV, but they only had one. And so everyone would get there and they'd crowd the doors. Or maybe you go to a lot of concerts and you've gone to one of the general admission concerts, right? And as people start to fill in that front section, people push you closer and closer to the stage. Or maybe you've gone to an amusement park and you get there early to wait in line so that you can be the first one to beat everyone else to wait in line at the ride. But everyone just kind of starts crushing towards the middle. Imagine a crushing crowd is just something where the number of people is greater than the space would allow. And I also want you to pay attention because the Bible was very particular with its words. There are no accidental words in the Bible. So if the point was the size of the crowd, it would have said, and there were so many people, and so many people were paying attention to Jesus, and he was doing such a good job of drawing in the crowd. But it doesn't. It uses a negative word. It says it's crushing, which reminds us the goal is not to build the crowd. And then we move on to verse 43. And a woman who was there had been subject to bleeding for 12 years, but no one could heal her. So apparently what we're supposed to learn is that amongst all these crowds, what does Jesus do? He focuses in on one person. It's a woman. What we see here is that she just is one amongst the crowd. But that's who we're going to talk about, the one. And why is she there? Verse 44, she came up behind and touched the edge of his cloak, and immediately her bleeding was stopped. So we saw that she had been bleeding for 12 years. She was incapable of being saved. In other versions of this scripture, it says that she literally spent all of her money on all of the doctors that she could find, and nothing stopped. But as soon as she got close enough to Jesus, immediately her bleeding stopped. So what we can assume is that this story could have ended right there. The Bible could have said, bleeding stopped, miracle happened, we don't need to talk about this lady anymore. But that's not what happens. In verse 45, Jesus stops. And he says, who touched me? When they all denied it, Peter said, Master, the people are crowding and pressing against you. Everyone denies it. And let's be honest, Peter knows a thing or two about denial. And he just basically says, of course people touched you. Look how many people are here. They're pushing against you. What's the problem? We're in a hurry. There's a very important person, Jairus, who has a very important need, his dying daughter, that gives you a very important opportunity to influence this gigantic crowd. Can we please just keep moving? But of course, that's not what happens. In verse 46, Jesus says this, someone touched me. I know that power has gone out from me. So I wanted to get this point across, so I just stuck it in here. But it's really important to notice. Jesus, he was never in a hurry, right? He's going to save a dying girl, not in a hurry. He knows he only has 3.5 years to change the world. He was never in a hurry. He still slowed down. He still found rest. What we should also notice, though, specifically about that verse, is there was something about that woman's touch that was special and unique that made it stand out amongst all the accidental bumping in the crowd. And I want to pick on social media again. Like, isn't that what that entire environment is like? It's just a bunch of people accidentally bumping up against each other, right? Oh, like, emoji, comment, like, emoji, comment, like, emoji, comment. Does anyone actually even read them? Or do you just scroll and say, oh, picture, like, oh, I know that person, comment. It's just a whole bunch of accidentally bumping up against other people. And that feels different than real life contact. We continue now. Verse 47 says, then the woman, seeing that she could not go unnoticed, came trembling and fell at his feet. In the presence of all the people, she told why she touched him and how she had been instantly healed. When I read these verses, I thought it was odd because here's a woman who had gotten exactly what she came for. She had faith that if I go and touch Jesus, I will be healed. And she was healed. And yet when confronted with the reality that other people might know, she trembled. She was afraid. Maybe she didn't want people to know she was sick. Maybe she didn't want people to know that she needed help. Maybe she didn't want people to know that she'd been healed. We don't know. But we know it was uncomfortable for her to be called out in front of the crowd. And then what happens next? Verse 48. Jesus says, daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace. Jesus could have literally said anything he wanted to that woman. He could have looked at her and rebuked her. He could have said, woman, you are unclean. So back in the day, if you were bleeding, you were considered unclean. You were supposed to stay away from people. Woman, you are unclean. You just made all of these people around you unclean. How dare you? He could have said, you thief, you stole from me. That was my power, and you came up and you stole and you took from me. How dare you? How many of us think of God that way? We are terrified to ask him or engage with him because we're worried he's going to look at us and say, how dare you? Why do you think I care about you? But we see how God reacts, or how Jesus reacts. He calls her daughter. Daughter is such a familial name. It is a name of belonging. It is a name of love. It is a name of you matter to me. And that's what he calls her. And great news, y'all. If you reach out to God, if you talk to him, that's how he's going to call you. My son, I'm so glad you picked up the phone and called me. Daughter, you're so beautiful. I'm so glad that we get to talk. And then he goes on to say something very simple. Your faith has healed you. That word faith is sometimes hard for me because I get caught up in yeah, he's God. He can do everything. Yeah, I believe that. I have faith in that. But I think for this moment, this is a really practical kind of faith, right? So we got a woman who went to a crowded area. She walks into the crowd. She fights her way through the crowd. She's close enough to Jesus that she then reaches out her hand and grabs just the edge of his cloth. That is an incredibly practical amount of faith. That is in the moment, moment by moment, decision by decision, action by action faith. Sometimes I wish I had more faith like that. See, the whole crowd was in the presence of Jesus. But don't miss this. No one was healed just because they were in the crowd. All of those people bumping up against Jesus, and we only hear about one woman who was healed. And this exposes us to the key point of the message. Jesus had a very set pattern of interacting with people, and it was how he showed engagement. So earlier we said practice 2 is being engaged. Now let's define engagement. Engagement happens when you have an intentional presence that leads to purposeful generosity through an individual relationship. That's what people are really looking for. Let's summarize that before we end this. Here's the story that drew me to this conclusion. It took a lot of intention by that woman to go to where Jesus was. It took a lot of humility by that woman to admit that she had run out of her own things to do and she needed help. It took that faith and that belief that Jesus was who he said that he was and could do what he said he would do. She had to take action. So that's that intentional presence by that woman. But then Jesus, he was so generous. Right? He's God, so no words needed to exchange place. But don't miss that he knew exactly what that woman needed to instantly heal her. How intentional and relational must that be between God and that woman through Jesus to just be able to heal her instantly? And then Jesus did it. He could have chose not to. He knew what she needed. He could have said no. He could have made a big deal, but instead it was just, and we're done. But this isn't like isolated. The miracles of the Bible are all about this intentional presence that led to purposeful generosity through that individual relationship. Even Jesus' most famous miracle about a crowd where he fed 5,000. Everybody talks about, he fed 5,000. Yes, but that started with one boy who had 5 loaves and 2 fish. And Jesus interacted with him and turned that into feeding 5,000. Jesus was really good about intentional presence that led him to purposeful acts of generosity through those individual relationships. And yes, that created incredible crowds, and we're thankful for that because none of us probably would be here if not for those acts that created crowds that spread Christianity. But when we talk about earlier, the happiest people we know, this is what they do different. They live life in an engaged way. And I know what some of you are immediately saying. That's fine, but you don't know my life. I wear the busy badge of honor. Can I see the busy badge of honor? There it is. We'll put that in the merch store. You can get your own busy badge of honor. I'm so busy doing important things. I don't have time to be engaged. Don't you know who I am or what I do or how important I am? Let's go to verse 49, the big conclusion. Jesus' rebuttal to that point. While Jesus was still speaking, someone came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader. Your daughter is dead, he said. Don't bother the teacher anymore. Well, shucks. We just remembered Jesus was drawing the crowd because he was on his way to save a dying girl. Yet he made time for this one woman. Why? Because Jesus was never in a hurry. Great news. Spoiler alert. Later in the verses, he saves the girl anyway. Another miracle. But here's my point. Jesus wasn't in a hurry. He had time for that one woman. He didn't have to stop. Remember? She was healed instantly. He chose to stop and make time for the woman. The conversation was completely extra effort because he cared about the woman. So I just want to remind you, there's rarely anything that is so urgent or more important that it justifies neglecting the person who's right in front of you. And I know, I'm not neglectful. Well, here's some examples. Do you fail to put down your phone when other people are talking to you? Do you always find one more text or email to respond to? There's always one more video I need to watch? Are you someone who keeps buying just one more thing from Amazon? Those are all ways of neglecting the person in front of you. I do it. My wife holds me accountable all the time. It's painful to be held accountable for things you know you shouldn't be doing. But I'm getting better. So I just want to remind you, you are never too busy. You should never allow yourself to become too overwhelmed so that you become too unaware or believe that you have not enough. Because when you do, you miss too many opportunities to love on the people that are right in front of you. All right, let's close this out. So in week 1, Josh referred to the isolation situation in America as a crisis. What I hope you're taking away from this story is that the answer to the crisis of loneliness is not going to be found in a crowd, which sounds counter. Remember, Jairus had all the influence in the world. It didn't help him. This woman was amongst a crowd of people, and most of them didn't experience a miracle. More doesn't heal. More doesn't save. More doesn't satisfy. That's all a bunch of scams. And you know what chasing scams does? Chasing scams removes margin in your calendar and your checkbook, which limits your ability to love like Jesus. So stop doing it. Be like the one woman whose faith enabled all of us to learn that some intentional presence can lead to purposeful generosity because of individual relationships. That's really the whole message of the Bible, right? At any point in time, God is so powerful that he could snap his fingers and force all of us to believe and accept, but he doesn't do that. The story of the Bible is about a desire to have an individual relationship with each and every one of us. Salvation comes through that individual relationship. So that's amazing. So we're going to make it practical. What changes everything is when you choose to live like Jesus by being engaged and slowing down and noticing people and calling them by name, giving generously. So I made it simple. In my mind, this means being engaged means we need to stop, we need to look, and we need to listen. And I started with a homecoming story. I'm going to end with a homecoming story. So I got kids, 2 now, that went to homecoming last night, which means I was part of the picture crowd at a place called Innis Woods. My wife said we should start a Parents Against Innis Woods campaign. So we're going to start Parents Against Pictures at Innis Woods. But anyway, I'm out, and I'm going with my son. He's a senior. And the number of young people who stopped me to say, "How are you, Mr. Couser?" I was humbled. And the only reason that happened is because faithfully, for years, our family opens our door every other Friday night to just come hang out. And we'll give you pizza, which you'll eat too much of, and juice boxes, which you'll drink all of, and we'll just have conversation. And the point of that was never to be called Mr. Couser at homecoming. The point of that was just to create a space where people felt heard and felt. And we just did that by stopping and looking and listening to these young people. So that's all you got to do. Practically, don't scroll past people or brush them by in the crowd of your schedule. Stop doing that. Next one. Ask yourself, who is the woman in my crowd who just needs someone to notice them? Next one. Let the people in front of you dictate how you interact with the world, not your to-do list. That one's painful. I'm a go-getter. Give someone your time, even if it feels inconvenient. Give someone your encouragement, even when it feels small. That's what you got to do, folks. Stop, look, listen, and engage. And that's how we show people Jesus. And when we show people Jesus, we're being good and faithful servants. All right, let's pray about it. Heavenly Father, you're awesome. You're way more awesome than I believe that you are. Way more awesome. I'm still learning every day how awesome you are, and I'm just so grateful that you Bless our lives with your presence, that you are an engaged God who slows down and makes us feel important if we let you. Help all of us in this room to run away from the scams and towards loving other people, because that's how we change the world, one relationship at a time. I love you, God. Amen.